I'm sorry to burst your bubble, Starmer, but I'm not buying it, and neither is anyone else. This latest claim that they've hit their targets with extra 2 million appointments in the NHS is not entirely clear. So the headline here says, "We've hit the target with 7 months to spare." And then Keir Starmer goes on a bit of a gloat, saying that he acknowledges that there's a lot more work to do, but the figures show that there's an extra 2 million appointments that were delivered during Labour's first 5 months in office. But as usual, it's not quite that straightforward. It never is. Which is why I hope you'll join me and subscribe to my channel here, Black Belt Secrets, which is a little bit more opinionated than my main channel now and again. Although today my main channel got fairly opinionated. I'll link that video below if you haven't caught up with that. Go and watch that as well. That's quite the thing, because putting British troops on the ground in Ukraine is, well, there might be some argument for it, but I think it gives a lot of people in the UK pause for thought. But let's stick with the story at hand. You can go and watch my other video for that one. Let's take a look at this one here, because they made a pledge to increase the number of appointments. Now, obviously, I've got my views on paying for the NHS staff, the increase and so on, and so I've talked about those in other videos, but it's not as clear as it might seem, because when we look at this here, Sky News, now all full credit to the chap who's done the research on this and done the write-up, the data reporter on this. Let's have a look. So again, the headline, extra 2 million NHS appointments in Labour's first 5 months. The government claims, and the emphasis on the word claims here. So it kicks off here to say, new figures published by NHS England show that between July and November 2024, the health service delivered almost 2.2 million more elective care appointments compared with the same period the previous year. Being the lawyer, I always pick up on certain words that might slip by most people, and the words elective care jumped out there. Now, you don't really need to be a lawyer to pick these up, but just a hint, there's always a word here or there that will give a deeper meaning to what you're reading, and indeed is the case here. So great credit here. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. That should do it. Great credit here to Daniel Dunford. Fantastic name there, I might have to say. He looked at the data here. He's a senior data journalist. His tag there is for X. I think that's the X tag. Let's just have a quick look and double check. Yes, it is. And I followed him before recording this. So go ahead and follow him. He says, the data published by NHS England today lists the number of certain types of elective outpatient appointments and diagnostic tests carried out between the start of July and the end of November 2024, and compares that to the same period in 2023. He says, this is where it gets really interesting, we've spoken to the NHS and tried to replicate their numbers to verify and add historical context to them, because there is always a historical context and you can always compare and contrast with something before. And that's one thing I pick up on a lot, is when someone has made a previous statement or something else which contradicts what they're saying. For example, Keir Starmer saying not a penny more on the council tax, and now they're going up to 10% or whatever it is. He goes on, we've spoken to the NHS to try and put historical context, but found that it's not actually possible to do that. What's being measured here is a specific list of appointments that hasn't really been recorded like this before. So hold the phone a minute. They are bragging, essentially, gloating about a record number of appointments in statistics for a type of appointment, a specific list of appointments that haven't really been recorded before. So what are they comparing it to? Let's read on. So they've not been recorded like this before. And what the figures don't show, Daniel goes on, is what has had to make way for these appointments to be prioritised. And then there's an infographic, 2.2 million extra appointments carried out between July and November 24 compared with the same dates previously, but some of it is adjusted. But then Daniel goes on, the scope of the data collected is limited to services that typically involve a consultant-led referral for treatment. That means it doesn't include emergency care, mental health services, or maternity treatments. Put together, these make up a significant proportion of NHS activity, but we don't know exactly how much. The NHS regularly publishes the numbers of the amount of treatments that have been carried out per month in data going back to 2007. But these aren't broken down in a way that means that we're able to compare them to figures published today. And that's a really interesting point. And I was going to do this video without the assistance of Daniel Dunford here, but I wasn't able to do so for this very reason, which led to really the substance of this video. I was going to compare the figures like for like with previous years because I expected, let's be honest, I expected to think, there's a massive reason why these figures are somewhat skewed. It gets even more interesting. Looking at the overall figures, we see an improved figure on last year, but not to the same extent in percentage terms. This is not to say that the NHS are massaging the figures or deliberately hiding anything, which I agree they're not. These targets were defined from the outset and have been achieved according to the specified definitions that they were aimed towards. So if you set a very, very specific list that you probably know you can achieve, and you define it in a specific way, and you target those and you analyze those, sure, you can hit your targets on those specific list of numbers. But NHS activity toward particular objectives comes at a cost. The things that don't fit in the priority list inevitably fall down the pecking order. The record waits in emergency care revealed on Thursday are further evidence of this. The NHS is delivering on the choices that politicians have made for them, but whether the public will agree that the delivery is worth the cost is another matter. Put into much simpler terms, they've achieved these goals because they've defined the list that they're going after. They can't really compare it to something before because these are specific defined lists that have not really been recorded in that way before. And they come at a cost because certain things have been deprioritized to prioritize others, which are possibly easier to do, such as the scope of the data collected here limiting to services that typically involve consultant-led referral for treatment, you might expect are going to be easier to do, easier to track, more likely to be a successful appointment, and so on. But it doesn't include the emergency care, mental health services, maternity treatments, etc., which make up a significant portion of the NHS activity, but they don't know by how much. And again, it's not to say that there's any misleading figures or deliberately hiding anything here. These are specific lists set up, specific targets set up, defined from the outset. So defining something you can set out to achieve, which in most circumstances is a good thing. If you're, if you're overweight and you're looking to lose weight, if you say I'm going to lose, let's say 5 stone in 6 months, that's not particularly realistic. So if you set a goal that you can achieve, then you're more likely to achieve that. But if you set an unrealistic goal, you're not likely to achieve that. And so to use a bit of an analogy here, imagine that the NHS was instead a restaurant with special menus. And let's say that they were promoting the idea of how many steaks and pasta dishes that they've managed to serve in the last 5 months. Record numbers of steaks, record numbers of pasta dishes served up. Impressive numbers. But what they don't mention is that they've had to scrap all of the salad carts altogether. Desserts are off the menu, and vegetarian, no, they're not available anymore because they just don't have the time, the staff, the money, or anything else. So in order to achieve the number of steaks and pasta dishes that they've been able to serve, which are impressive numbers, the other things have had to be cut away. So that's a little bit like the NHS statistics here, focusing on certain treatments, but omitting other areas and cutting those out because they might not be so impressive, because it doesn't show by how much. It doesn't show those figures. So the figures that are impressive are on the face of it, with my limited understanding of statistical analysis, on the face of it, it appears that the numbers you're being shown and that they're gloating about are designed to look impressive, and they would seem to be impressive. And there's other things that come into play here. I've read all sorts of posts about areas that are cancelling appointments, and also not to mention the bit that played into this, that they're also comparing it with a period of time when we had the doctor strikes, the junior doctor strikes. And so quite obviously there weren't as many available appointments, so that skewed the figures somewhat as well. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's not a case of simply they've improved things across the board. It's not quite that straightforward. The Sky News article goes on. Pressure remains in other areas. They found a number of patients waiting for over 12 hours in A&E. Now I've realised you can't read that anymore. 12 hours in A&E after a decision's been made to admit them, known as a trolley wait. Now, I've not, thankfully, I touch some wood, I am rather superstitious sometimes. I've not been to A&E for myself for quite a long time, actually. I think once I was kicked in the ribs and I had a broken rib in martial arts training. And I was seen probably within an hour, and actually they did nothing because, well, it's a broken rib. There's not a lot they could do. But waiting for 12 hours in A&E, that's quite horrific. And that's just a recent report here. Waits of this length, the article goes on, usually indicative of a lack of available beds in the hospital, where almost non-existent before the pandemic. January total equivalent to more than 15% of all patients admitted via A&E is more than the total recorded in over 11 years from August 2010 to October 2021. And now all of this is not to criticise. I mean, it's a good thing that these numbers are up. And as I said, NHS is not deliberately hiding and massaging any figures here, but by all means, set targets that you can achieve and so on. But then when you are putting out this great news, it has to really be with full transparency about everything else that's going on. But I do support funding the NHS properly. Now, we've got here £40 million handed to trusts to go further and faster, etc. But we do have the compounding problem of immigration as well. If we are receiving many more individuals for whom we are to provide care, etc., and that is not going away, and that is going to on the face of it get worse, because whilst they say they are planning to stop the boats, that doesn't really seem to be the case. I mean, if we look at small boat crossings, I mean, these are public figures. You can look this up. I mentioned this in my other video today. 240 individuals arrived 2 days ago by 4 boats, in addition to the 100 odd in the last week or so. So these numbers are continuing to go up. Now, they are only, I say only, but they are only in the hundreds, but it's hundreds more for whom they're going to have to provide care, and these numbers are compounding and compounding. But either way, I thought you'd find that interesting. Leave me your thoughts and comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.